After my mother died, I couldn't resist anymore and started spending the nights with my stepfather. Good afternoon, everyone on the Infidelity Stories channel. My name is Ivana, I'm 34 years old, and yes, I'm married to my stepfather. That's right, you heard me correctly. Please don't judge me right away. Listen to my story first before drawing conclusions. Everything began when I was 27 years old, and my mother was diagnosed with an illness that turned our lives upside down. She was a lively, always smiling woman who loved to dance, and she was kind and caring with everyone, especially with me and my father. They were a deeply in-love couple. After a year of chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and even surgery, we were confident she would beat the disease, but it came back with a vengeance, spreading even further. The doctors told us that from that point on, the only thing left was to ensure she lived as comfortably as possible, since there was nothing else to be done. Instead of being sad, my mum decided to live her remaining time to the fullest. We travelled, cooked, watched movies, and did things we never imagined. One day, while we were watching TV together, she made the most unexpected request. "Ivana, when I'm gone, I want you to take care of your stepfather." "Of course, Mom," I replied, "but you still have time with us." "I don't have as much time as you think. I need to teach you some things, so you'll be ready when the time comes." At first, I thought she meant learning to cook his favourite meals or help him with the house. But I wasn't prepared for what she said next. "I want you to take my place in every way. I'd rather it be you than someone else, and I know he'll want it to be you when the time comes." I was shocked, staring at her in disbelief, but she insisted she was serious. "You've grown into a beautiful woman, and your stepfather loves you. When I'm gone, I want you to be there for him." It was the kind of situation that left no room for doubts or hesitation. I was determined. People had always told me how much I resembled my mother. My uncles, neighbours, even her friends would point out the similarities. The comparisons were inevitable. Like my mum, I was petite and slender, with wavy hair and the same slightly upturned nose that caught people's attention. But despite the physical resemblances, there was one major difference between us. My mother always had a captivating presence. She knew how to use her charm to her advantage, which included wearing high heels, impeccable makeup, and exuding natural confidence. I, on the other hand, had always been more reserved, shy even, content to stay in the background. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't that quiet girl anymore, watching the world while my mother shone in the spotlight. I wanted to be noticed. I needed him to notice me. That's when I made a decision. I was going to get closer to my mother, or at least the image she had always projected. I began wearing the same perfume she used to wear, a sweet, intense scent that lingered in the air. I wanted him to smell it and be immediately reminded of her, but at the same time, see something new in me, something different, a transformation. I started dressing like her too, so that he could see I was no longer the same girl I used to be. Now, there was something about me that demanded attention. Everything was carefully planned. The perfect opportunity presented itself on what seemed like an ordinary night. He'd be coming home tired from work, as usual. I knew the key was to create a familiar, comfortable atmosphere, but with just enough difference to spark his interest. I prepared his favourite meal, something simple, but I knew he loved it. But the most important part of the night wasn't the dinner. It was what would come after. I needed him to see me in a different light. I chose one of my mother's dresses. It was black, tight, and when I put it on, I felt a wave of confidence wash over me. For a few moments, it felt like I wasn't just wearing a dress. I was wearing the strength she had always had. The dress fit me perfectly, as if it had been made for me, and my heart raced as I thought about the reaction it might provoke. When he arrived, everything was ready. The table was set, the dinner was perfect, and I was there dressed in a way I knew he wouldn't miss. During dinner, I noticed his eyes on me more than usual. He wasn't hiding it. I could feel his gaze on me, trying to process what was happening, and I was prepared for it. After dinner, as was his habit, he went to the couch, loosening his tie and taking a deep breath, trying to relax after a long day. I watched him as he settled in, knowing that this was the critical moment. I prepared a drink, his favorite, and walked over to him, each step deliberate, slow, as if every movement was part of a well-rehearsed dance. Holding the glass in my hand, dressed in that black dress, with the perfume lingering in the air, I approached him. "Here you go, Dad, you deserve to relax a little after working all week," I said softly as I handed him the drink. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're really taking good care of me," he replied, smiling. But there was something in his voice, a hint of tension. "I want to take care of you much more," I whispered, sitting down next to him on the couch. The silence between us was heavy, filled with an unspoken tension, a desire that could no longer be ignored. My heart was pounding, but I remained composed. "Mum taught me everything you like," I said, letting my words hang in the air, knowing the impact they would have. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard, trying to avoid looking directly into my eyes. "Ivana, I'm really tired," he said, his voice strained and slightly trembling. It was obvious he was searching for a way out of the situation. "I think I should head to my room," he added, attempting to rise from the couch. But I couldn't let him leave. There was something growing between us, something that was about to erupt, and I couldn't allow him to simply walk away. "Wait," I said, gently placing my hand on his arm, just firm enough to make him pause. "I'll help you," I continued, my voice soft, almost pleading. I knew he was starting to realize that there was more going on here. "Let me help you relax," I added with a light smile, moving even closer to him. That was the decision that changed everything. Without thinking about the consequences, I acted on impulse. I leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't an innocent kiss, but it wasn't aggressive either. It was filled with passion, with a desire that had been building for a long time. I felt his body tense with surprise, and before he could react, my hand found its way to his chest. "No," he whispered hoarsely, trying to pull away, but with little conviction. He shifted on the couch but didn't stand up. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said, his voice tight, unsure. "But this is wrong," he added. "Did I do it wrong?" I asked, pouting slightly, trying to appear innocent and regretful. "I tried to do what Mom taught me, but I've never really tried it with you, so I wasn't sure if I was doing it right." "I'm sorry," I said in a low, almost timid voice, though deep down I was fully aware of what I was doing. For a moment, he was silent, his eyes locked on mine, a mix of confusion and shock written all over his face. "What on earth are you talking about, Ivana?" he finally asked, incredulity in his voice. "What did your mother teach you?" He shook his head, clearly trying to process what I had just said. But I could see he was lost in his own thoughts. Yet something in him shifted, and I saw a small, almost imperceptible smile tug at the corners of his lips, despite his efforts to hide it. "She taught me everything. All the things you like." Those words flowed out of my mouth so naturally, but they carried years of pent-up intensity. I remembered the first time my mother had talked to me about this, and how strange it had sounded then. How was I supposed to care for him when she was gone? Back then, I thought she was joking, or that the illness had made her lose her mind. The idea seemed bizarre, completely out of touch with reality, and I barely understood what she meant. But as time passed and I grew older, everything began to make sense. Every conversation, every piece of advice, every gesture from her now felt like part of a puzzle finally coming together. She had known exactly what she was doing from the very beginning, far more than I could ever have imagined. "I promised her I would take care of you when she was gone," I continued. At first, that promise felt like a burden, but now, somehow, that weight has turned into desire, a desire that's been growing inside me slowly until it's become something I can't control. I paused, looking into his eyes, trying to gauge his reaction. I understand now what she wanted. I understand the meaning behind her words. And more than that, I feel it. I want to take care of you, not just as someone by your side, but as your woman. The story is not over yet. Please consider subscribe. As I spoke those words aloud, I felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through my body. It was like releasing a secret I had kept buried deep inside, and the moment it left my lips, everything changed. He looked at me in a way he never had before, his eyes searching mine, filled with a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite name. It was as if he was trying to process everything I had just said, as if my confession had shattered something between us, yet opened up something entirely new. "Ivana," he began, his voice firm but tinged with hesitation. "Do you even understand what you're saying? Do you understand what this means?" His words hung in the air, thick with the tension that had been building between us. My heart raced, and for a moment I wondered if I'd gone too far, if I'd crossed a line from which there would be no return. But I knew deep down that there was no turning back now. I had opened Pandora's box, and whatever was about to happen, I had to see it through. "Yes, I understand," I replied, my voice steady but soft. "I want this. I want you. I've thought about it for so long, and now I'm sure this is what Mum wanted, and it's what I want too." For a brief second, the silence was deafening. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, feel the pounding of my heart in my chest. He stared at me, his gaze intense, as if he was trying to find some hint of uncertainty, some sign that I didn't mean what I said. But there was none. "Are you absolutely sure?" he asked, his voice quieter now, filled with a seriousness that made my pulse quicken. "Because once we cross this line, Ivana, there's no going back. This changes everything." "I know," I whispered, feeling a wave of emotions wash over me. Desire, anticipation, fear. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. "I want this. I want you." The air between us felt electrified, charged with the weight of what was about to happen. Slowly, he leaned in, his face inches from mine, his breath warm against my skin. I could feel the tension radiating off him, see the way his hands clenched and unclenched as if he was struggling with some inner turmoil. "I can't believe I'm doing this," he muttered under his breath, almost as if talking to himself. But before I could say anything, his lips were on mine, and all rational thought evaporated. The kiss was different from the tentative one I had given him earlier. This time, it was full of passion, of pent-up emotions that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. I could feel the intensity of his desire in the way he kissed me, the way his hands found their way to my waist, pulling me closer as if he couldn't bear to let go. I melted into him, the heat between us rising with every second. It was like something had been unleashed inside both of us, something that had been waiting for this exact moment to break free. The world outside seemed to disappear. There was no more right or wrong, no more hesitation or fear, just the two of us in that moment, giving in to everything we had been holding back. His hands roamed over my body, gentle at first but growing more insistent, more desperate, as if he was trying to memorize every inch of me. I could feel the strength in his grip, the urgency in his movements, and it only fueled the fire inside me. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered against my lips, his voice rough with desire, as if he needed to hear me say it again. "Yes," I breathed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure." That was all it took. His hands gripped me tighter, pulling me onto his lap, and I could feel the full weight of his desire pressing against me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest, but I didn't care. All I cared about was him, the way he made me feel, the way everything seemed to fall away when we were together like this. He kissed me again, harder this time, and I responded with equal fervor, my hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. I could feel his body tense beneath mine, the heat between us almost unbearable, and I knew that this was it. There was no going back now. We had crossed the line, and everything was about to change. Without breaking the kiss, he stood up, lifting me effortlessly in his arms. I wrapped my legs around his waist, holding on to him as he carried me to the bedroom, our kisses growing more urgent, more intense with every step. When we reached the bed, he gently laid me down, his eyes locking with mine as he hovered over me, his expression filled with a mixture of desire and tenderness. I want to make sure you're ready, he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I want this to be perfect for you. It already is, I whispered, my heart swelling at the care in his voice. I've been waiting for this. For you. With that, he leaned down and kissed me again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if savoring every moment. His hands moved over my body with expert precision, and I could feel the heat building between us, the anticipation growing with every touch. For the first time, I understood what my mother had meant. This wasn't just about desire or attraction, it was about something deeper, something that had been growing inside me for years without me even realizing it. And now, finally, it had all come to the surface, ready to be embraced. What followed was a blur of sensations, each one more intense than the last. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt myself being carried away on a wave of emotion that I had never experienced before. It was like we were both lost in each other, completely consumed by the moment. And when it was over, when we were both lying there, breathless and spent, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I looked over at him, at the man who had been my stepfather, my protector, and now, something much more. In that moment, I knew that everything had changed. The bond between us had shifted, deepened in a way I never could have predicted. We weren't just stepfather and stepdaughter anymore. We were something else entirely. Two people bound together by more than just circumstance, but by a shared desire, a connection that went far beyond the roles we had once played. And as I lay there in the quiet aftermath, my heart still racing, I realized that this was what my mother had wanted all along. She had known what she was doing, even when I hadn't. She had seen the potential in us, the bond that could grow from loss, from love, from desire. I had kept my promise to her, but more importantly, I had followed my own heart. And now, as I looked at the man beside me, I knew that this was only the beginning. The life that stretched out before us was full of possibilities, full of new beginnings. We had crossed the line, yes, but there was no regret, no hesitation, only the certainty that this was where we were meant to be, together, and I wouldn't have it any other way. As I lay there, the room bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains, I felt the weight of everything that had just happened settle over me like a warm blanket. The intensity of it all, the emotions, the passion, the raw connection between us was almost overwhelming. My mind swirled with thoughts and feelings that I wasn't entirely sure how to process. But one thing was crystal clear. This was the start of something new, something I could never have anticipated. Beside me, he lay still, his chest rising and falling slowly, his breath gradually evening out as he relaxed. I could feel the heat of his body next to mine, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and it brought a strange sense of comfort. I glanced over at him, watching as his eyes fluttered closed, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of closeness, a bond that felt more intimate than anything I had ever experienced. This man, my stepfather, was now more than just a figure in my life. He was part of me in a way that no one else ever had been or could be. And that realization hit me with a mixture of emotions. There was a sense of fulfillment, but also an undercurrent of uncertainty about what this new chapter would bring. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the quiet sounds of the night, my thoughts drifting. My mind kept returning to my mother, the memory of her words echoing in my head. She had set all of this in motion, and now I was walking the path she had laid out for me. There was a strange comfort in that, knowing that in some way she had prepared me for this moment. But it also left me with lingering questions. Had this truly been what she wanted? Had she foreseen the depth of the emotions that would arise between us? Or had she simply hoped that we would find solace in each other after she was gone? The truth was, I would never know for sure. But one thing I did know was that this new reality, this connection, was something I had chosen. It wasn't just about fulfilling my mother's last wishes anymore. It was about following my own desires, my own heart. At some point, I must have drifted off to sleep because when I woke up, the room was filled with the soft glow of morning light. I blinked, disoriented for a moment, before the events of the previous night came rushing back to me. I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach, unsure of what would happen now, how things would be between us after everything had changed. I turned my head slightly, expecting to find him still beside me, but the bed was empty. My heart skipped a beat as panic briefly took hold. Had he regretted it? Had he left, unable to face what had happened between us? But then I heard the faint sound of movement from the kitchen, the quiet clinking of dishes, and I exhaled in relief. He hadn't left. He was still here. I got up, wrapping myself in a robe as I padded quietly toward the kitchen. The scene that greeted me was unexpectedly domestic. He was standing by the stove, making breakfast. His back was to me, and I could see the tension in his shoulders as he moved with deliberate care, as if trying to keep his mind focused on the simple task at hand. I hesitated in the doorway for a moment, unsure of how to approach him now that the dynamics between us had shifted so drastically. What were we supposed to say to each other after what had happened? How were we supposed to act? "Good morning," I finally said, my voice softer than I intended. He turned at the sound of my voice, his expression unreadable for a split second before he gave me a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning," he replied quietly. "I made some coffee. Breakfast should be ready in a few minutes." There was an awkwardness in the air, a tension that neither of us seemed to know how to navigate. I stepped further into the kitchen, my eyes searching his face for any sign of regret or hesitation. But all I saw was a man who looked just as uncertain as I felt. I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to think of something to say to break the silence. But no words came. What could I possibly say? How could I address the enormity of what had transpired between us the night before? Finally, he spoke, his voice hesitant but filled with a quiet determination. "Ivana, about last night," he trailed off, his brow furrowing as he seemed to struggle with his words. "I don't regret it," he said after a moment, looking directly at me. "But I need to know how you feel about it. If this is something you want, or if it was just..." His voice faltered, and I realized he was as unsure as I was, perhaps even afraid of what my answer might be. I set down my coffee cup, taking a deep breath before responding. "I don't regret it either," I said softly, stepping closer to him. "I've thought about this, about us, for a long time, and I'm sure this is what I want." His shoulders visibly relaxed at my words, and for the first time that morning, the tension between us seemed to ease. He reached out, taking my hand in his, and the simple gesture brought a sense of calm washing over me. "But where do we go from here?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. "What happens next?" It was the question that had been weighing on both of us since the moment we crossed that line. We had entered uncharted territory, and there was no clear map to guide us through what lay ahead. "I don't know," I admitted, squeezing his hand gently. "But we'll figure it out. Together." He nodded, his expression softening as he pulled me into his arms, holding me close. The warmth of his embrace, the steady beat of his heart against mine, reassured me in a way that words never could. Whatever came next, we would face it side by side. As we stood there in the quiet of the morning, wrapped in each other's arms, I realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would be filled with its own challenges and uncertainties, but also with the promise of something deeper, something that transcended the past and looked toward the future. And in that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I had made my choice, and now, whatever happened, we would face it together. As breakfast sizzled on the stove and the sunlight poured in through the windows, I knew that somehow, everything would be okay. The world might not understand our bond, but we did. And that was enough. The story of my life had taken a turn I never expected, but I was ready for it. Ready to embrace whatever the future held. Before you leave, remember to subscribe to the channel by activating the Tinkerbell to receive notification every time.